Hey everybody, this is John for Pioneer Nexus MTG, coming at you with the top 5 Pioneer decks, starting out with the deck that most defines the Pioneer/Explorer format. That is Amalia Combo. Now, Amalia Combo, people would say, because it's a potential turn 3 kill, because it does this, that, or the other thing. It forces you to have removal. It forces you to do this, forces you to do that. Checks a lot of the boxes that Geological Appraiser combo checks that maybe it should be banned. I'm not here to argue that point, one way or another. But what I will say is it's kind of cut off a portion of the format, much like what's happened in the modern format. And that is, aggressive decks are almost useless in the presence of Amalia Combo. When you're fighting on the axis of having to deal with a combo that you have to have instant speed interaction for, fighting a format where there is a true combo deck, there are 2 removal-heavy mid-range red-based decks, and now blue-white control is everywhere to fight Amalia Combo. The format is in a rough place for aggressive decks. Now, there was a time during summer of last year where a new aggro deck would pop up, do well for a couple weekends, kind of disappear. Whether that was humans, whether that was a deck like Boros Convoke, it was a deck like Spirits on occasion. Obviously, between the disappearance of Mono Green and the rise of Abzan Amalia Combo, there's a lot less for the aggressive decks to fight through. For my personal pet deck, that's a good thing because, well, my personal pet deck actually struggles the most against aggressive decks. But for the format overall and the health of the format, Amalia is kind of the gatekeeper that really stirs the rest of the format. It's a very redundant combo deck that has a fairly reasonable matchup against the targeted spell removal decks like Rakdos and is it Phoenix. Has a terrible blue-white control matchup and an okay matchup against Lotus Fuel. They're basically similar speed decks that have a little bit of interaction for each other, but overall this deck's just a little bit better in that matchup, but still a deck overall that is kind of the gatekeeper of the format and the reason why the format's kind of in the place that it currently is. Number 4, Lotus Field Combo. Now, Lotus Field Combo, ironically, has kind of gone through a bit of a metamorphosis over time. Now, the main things are still the same. You're still a Lotus Field Thespian Stage deck. You're still trying to assemble a bunch of mana, find an Emergent Ultimatum, get an Omniscience into play, and then win the game with either recurring your Chandras with Balaged recoveries, or generating a lot of mana, finding a Lair of the Hydra, copying it with your Thespian Stage, beating your opponent down, or some other win con out of the sideboard, depending on what your configuration is. The newer additions have been Strict Proctor, cards like Tail's End, and was the 6-mana version of Tail's End. I think I would know it, considering I used to play it a lot in the blue-white Lotus Field combo decks. But basically, you just have Stifle effects to not trigger your lands, get a little bit ahead on mana, so then you don't have to play things like Arboreal Grazer anymore. Plus, Strict Proctor, ironically, is quite good against Amalia Combo, stifling the triggers unless they're paying 2 for each trigger. So, it's actually a fairly reasonable card, both as a hate card against one of the top decks of the format, also plays well with the rest of your deck, and then your sideboard plans. A lot of these decks have the Dromoka Zakama plan, sweepers, things to fight counterspell decks, etc. This deck has been fairly well placed. It has a reasonable control matchup, has a fairly reasonable matchup against both Rakdos midrange and Is It Phoenix. Although it's gotten a little bit worse against Rakdos, with Rakdos' speed picking up a little bit, especially in the Pioneer format where it's picked up both copies of Inti and Smuggler's Copter. Things that haven't been picked up as much in the Explorer format, and obviously not really relevant because this deck doesn't exist in Explorer quite yet because of the lack of hidden strings. But this is a card that once this card is in the format, that all bets are off. That deck's going to do quite well. But for now, it is the number 4 deck in the Pioneer format. I apologize if I said Modern. I don't think I said Modern, but Pioneer, Explorer is the formats we're talking about. I digress. Blue-White Control. Now, Blue-White Control is in a weird spot in that it's always kind of felt reasonable, but a little middling. A couple of things have happened. Now, first off, it got Get Lost, which the one thing this deck has been lacking is a Doomblade-esque effect. Something that can come down, answer everything in instant speed. Now, Get Lost doesn't answer everything, but it does hit creatures, enchantments, and planeswalkers, which allows you to hold up instant speed answers to Quintorius combo, Amalia combo, Shoulderids, opposing planeswalkers, etc. And then it will soon be getting the new kind of color-restricted mana leak. So this deck is in an interesting spot in the format. It tends to tee off on Amalia, has a reasonable Murktide matchup. Wow, too much Modern on the brain. Has a reasonable Is It Phoenix matchup. Has an okay-ish matchup against Lotus Field, especially game number 1. Has an okay matchup against Rakdos game number 1, although game 2 and game 3 get a little rough with Thoughtseize, Duress, Go Blank, and all the other party favorites like Reckoner Bankbuster, Smuggler's Copter, Shoulderids, all the party favorites the Blue-White Control doesn't like to see. But the reason this deck has kind of moved up just that tiny little bit is its matchup against Amalia combo. And for that reason, it's number 3 in our Modern Pioneer format. Wow, Modern on the brain today. Number 2, Is It Phoenix? Now, this is a deck that really hasn't changed all that much in the last several months. At least since the Discover combo got banned. The Geological Appraiser version of it, that is. It's a Ledger Shredder Arclight Phoenix deck. It just comes down to, are you more of the card advantage version, or are you more of the Galvanic Iteration Temporal Trespass version? Now, on Explorer, you really have no choice. You have to be the card advantage version, although Pieces of the Puzzle doesn't really see as much play. Instead, you see Picklock Prankster. Not sure which of the versions see more play in Pioneer proper. I know in Explorer, it's definitely the Picklock Prankster version. Of course, that said, the decks are trying to do the same thing. You're using Ledger Shredders to beat your opponent down. Arclight Phoenix is kind of a grindy card. You just kind of overwhelm your opponent with sheer card selection. Now, the problems this deck can run into is actual hard combo decks can be a little bit tricky. Both Lotus Field combo and to a lesser extent Quintorius can be somewhat difficult matchups. Blue-White Control with the right hate cards like Narset and such can be tricky. And the Rakdos matchup is certainly not easy, although you do have the refill button of Treasure Cruise, which can especially help game number 1. But this deck is very good against aggro, fairly good at grinding against other mid-range decks, and is a little bit soft to the combo decks of the format, which not named Amalia combo, I should say. Finally, Rakdos midrange. Now, Rakdos, in some ways, has almost kind of become the most aggressive deck in the format, at least the ones that see play at the top tables. And that is because the deck's curve has gone down a little bit, with Inti and Smuggler's Copter being added to the party. Now, this has always been a deck that's had very good card quality up the chain, whether it was the 1-drops, whether it was the 3 and 4-drops. But this deck, its choke point always used to be the 3-mana slots, the Fables, the Bone Crusher Giants, Graveyard Trespasser, Liliana. Instead, the choke points now become the 2-mana slot, with Inti and Smuggler's Copter really adding your card selection choices. Blood Tithe Harvester has always been a solid card. Bitter Triumph, another new aura removal spell that's been added to the deck, allows you to have basically an instant speed answer to almost anything. With the plus or minus of discarding a card or 3 life, depending on the matchup that you're in. Depends on which one's more of an opportunity cost. But this is kind of the ultimate rock-based mid-range deck. It has a bunch of answers to a lot of things in the sideboard. This is a deck that continuously gets better in the post-board games. And there really aren't too many over-the-top decks that can really punish it anymore. Obviously, Lotus Field combo has traditionally been a difficult matchup for it, but as this deck has gotten a little bit faster, that's not as true as it was. Not Amalia combo. Amalia combo is ironically a slightly difficult matchup, although because it's knowing when to hold up mana, when to interact, when to get aggressive, that can be a bit tricky. But the Quintorius combo, game 1 is a bit of a mess, but game 2 and game 3, because of the disruption this deck has access to, tends to be quite good for this deck. And the fact that the Quintorius combo deck cannot really play things like Leyline of Sanctity. So as far as the format overall, Lost Caverns did certainly shake things up. Whether it was Quintorius, Geological Praiser, Amalia combo, things like Bitter Triumph being put into the format, Inti into the format, Smuggler's Copter unban, the banning of Karn the Great Creator, all really kind of shaking up the format into this kind of new stable point that it's at. How is the deck or the format going to change moving forward? Kind of hard to say. With no real aggressive deck in the format, it kind of becomes this kind of back and forth thing. Like, you have to respect Amalia combo, you have to respect Lotus Field combo, but other than that, you're trying to play Battle Cruiser Magic. So decks like Enigmatic Fires, decks like Quintorius combo, other decks of that ilk, Niv to Light, are all kind of rising to the top. Rakdos Sacrifice. So there's a lot of decent mid-range decks in the format that are kind of trying to go over the top of these decks, but they tend to struggle a little bit against Amalia. So the format's balanced, but I don't know that people are necessarily enjoying it a lot. I personally enjoy the Quintorius combo deck. I think especially with the absence of the aggressive decks, especially the Thalia and the Spirit decks, or Thalia-based decks and the Spirit-based decks, that Amalia Quintorius combo is fairly reasonable positioned, especially if you learn to play tricky matchups like Blue-White Control and Abzan Amalia. So it's still a format where you can learn a deck and expect to do fairly reasonably with it, although don't expect that to be a aggressive deck anytime soon. So that's it. If you like Pioneer content, Pioneer and Explore content, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Hope to see you for our next video.